If you ever drive down the dusty road into Dry Creek, Texas, in April, you can't miss the way the whole town comes alive for the annual spring auction. Trucks line the main drag, voices echo off the weathered bricks, and every rancher within 50 miles tries to prove they still matter. On this particular morning, the air snapped with more than just the smell of spring. Rumors swirled. Some folks whispered the Carter Ranch was finally finished. Others chuckled behind their hands about old Maggie Carter clinging to ghosts. But nobody could ignore the big, battered horse trailer parked by the show barn. Maggie Carter, 68 years old, but still walking like a woman with something left to prove, moved through the crowd with her chin up, her silver hair tied in a no-nonsense bun. She wore her late husband's denim jacket, patches at the elbows, and a pair of boots scuffed by years in the saddle. Folks watched her, some with pity, some with that mean little thrill you get seeing a legend fall. For years, the Carter Ranch had been a powerhouse, known for champions and the kind of horses city folks would mortgage a house for. Now, with her savings nearly gone and her daughter nowhere to be found, Maggie knew everyone expected a fire sale. She also knew she had one last card to play. Inside the barn, tension brewed thick as humidity. The auctioneer's voice boomed over the PA, running down the usual list: feeders, old geldings, a couple of broken-down mares. Then came the hush, sharp and sudden, as Maggie stepped into the ring. She didn't say a word. She just lifted the rope, and out strode Silver Monarch. The crowd gasped. Monarch was something out of a story. 17 hands, dark bay, muscles rippling under a coat that caught the light like burnished mahogany. His mane fell in waves, almost black, and there was a white star on his forehead, sharp as a lightning bolt. He moved with a kind of arrogant grace, like he owned the dirt he stood on. For a moment, nobody made a sound. Then the buzz started. Whispers of bloodlines, rumors about the last of the Monarch stock, bets about who'd dare to open the bidding. Someone in the back laughed. "Didn't know you still had a horse worth looking at, Maggie." But his voice faltered as Monarch reared, pawing the air, wild and electric. Maggie's hands stayed steady on the lead rope. The auctioneer, smelling blood, leaned into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, Silver Monarch, direct descendant of Black Thunder, the Triple County champion, the last of the line. What'll you start me at?" It was like a spark in dry grass. Hands shot up, shouts ricocheted off the rafters. Old rivals, the Johnsons from over at Double J, sly Sarah Mathis, who'd never forgiven Maggie for beating her back in '96, even Tom Ortega, who'd once promised Maggie the Monarch line would die with her. All wanted a piece. The bidding roared past 20 grand before the dust even settled. Maggie kept her eyes front, jaw set, but her heart slammed in her chest. She could almost feel her husband's voice in her ear. "Careful, Mags, the sharks smell blood." Near the edge of the ring, two boys squabbled over who'd seen Monarch run the Wild Creek first, while a television crew from Dallas elbowed for a better shot. A drunk rancher tried to sneak closer, only to catch Monarch's fierce glare. He stumbled back, muttering. The noise rose, bidding jumping by thousands, sweat beading on brows, old alliances forming and breaking in the blink of an eye. Then, just as the price hit an impossible 35,000, the doors at the far end of the barn slammed open. Heads whipped around, and in strode a woman with eyes like storm clouds and hair loose around her shoulders. Evelyn Carter. Maggie's daughter, gone for over a decade, her name barely spoken on the ranch since the night she left. Her boots echoed as she crossed the sawdust, and the entire crowd fell silent, the auctioneer frozen, mouth hanging open. Maggie felt the world tilt, a cold ache flooding her chest. Monarch stamped and snorted, unsettled by the tension in the air. Nobody moved. The town, all their small-town gossip, their curiosity, their grudges, faded into background noise. Only Maggie and her daughter stood at the center of the storm, history coiling between them like barbed wire. The auctioneer cleared his throat, uncertain. Bidding stands at 35. But Evelyn cut him off, her voice low, carrying across the barn. You can't do this, Mom? The crowd rippled with shock. Maggie's hands trembled just a little. Monarch tossed his head. For a heartbeat, Maggie considered running, leaving Monarch, leaving the ranch, just turning her back on all of it. But something inside her held. Not yet. The first shot had been fired, but the war was just beginning. The auction barn held its breath as Evelyn Carter strode forward, boots thudding against packed earth, her gaze locked on Maggie with an intensity that drew every eye. Townsfolk shifted, whispering, as the shock of her return rippled outward. Maggie's throat felt tight, the world suddenly far too bright and close. Silver Monarch pranced restlessly at her side, catching the tension in the air, his ears flicking back and forth. Evelyn stopped at the ring's edge, hands balled at her sides, chest heaving. Years had passed since Maggie had seen her daughter, yet in that moment, time snapped back. The defiant tilt of Evelyn's chin, the way her mouth pinched when she was angry, the storm brewing in her gray eyes. It was like seeing her late husband's spirit come alive in their child. Maggie swallowed, bracing herself, knowing there would be no hiding now. The auctioneer, red-faced and flustered, looked between them. Do we have another bid? No, Evelyn said, loud enough for all to hear. Her voice was clear, trembling with emotion. This auction is over. Murmurs shot through the crowd, but Maggie squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. You don't get to decide that, Evelyn. Evelyn stepped into the ring, boots crunching on sawdust. I'm not going to let you sell him, or sell this ranch if that's what you're planning. Maggie felt heat rise in her face. You don't know what I've been through, what the ranch has been through. We're drowning. Evelyn, Monarch is all we have left. If I don't do this, we lose everything. Evelyn shook her head, blinking fast, a tremor in her voice. You always put these horses first, always. Even when I was a kid, it was Monarch's bloodline. The breeding, the next big race. Never me. Never us. Someone in the crowd gasped. The auctioneer stepped back, wisely surrendering the ring to family business. Maggie tried to reply, but the words tangled. She glanced at Silver Monarch, who danced anxiously, his powerful body twitching as if sensing the storm within his owner. Evelyn pressed on, voice cracking, raw. Do you remember my 16th birthday? I waited all day for you. You promised. I sat on the porch until the sun went down. You never came, because Monarch was foaling and you forgot about me. The memory stabbed deep. Maggie wanted to deny it, wanted to blame the hard years, the drought, the endless work of keeping the Carter name alive. But the truth pressed down. She had failed. More than once. People shifted, some embarrassed, others unable to look away from the wreckage of a family laid bare. Old friends of Maggie's looked away, some shaking their heads, others glaring in sympathy at Evelyn. Maggie's voice came out softer, nearly breaking. Evie, I know I let you down. I know I did. After your daddy died, I tried to keep everything going, tried to be everything. I wasn't enough. I didn't know how. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her jaw was set. You could have asked for help. You could have let me in. Instead, you pushed me away. Maggie's hands shook on Monarch's lead rope. The stallion nuzzled her shoulder, searching for comfort. I was scared, Evie. Scared you'd leave if you saw how weak I was. And you did, anyway. A heavy silence fell. Dust drifted through a shaft of light, sparkling in the barn's charged air. The crowd, hungry for drama, was now frozen in the gravity of real pain. Evelyn took a step closer. You never called. Not once in 10 years. Not when I needed you most. Not when I lost my job, or when I was sick. Nothing. Maggie bowed her head, tears stinging her eyes. For a moment she felt every year she'd lived, every loss, every mistake. She didn't care that the whole town was watching. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm so sorry. If I could do it over, I'd change everything. Evelyn shook her head, wiping her eyes roughly. You can't change the past. Mom. Suddenly a voice rang out from the back. Tom Ortega, never one to miss a spectacle. You two want to take this somewhere else? Or should we start bidding on your family secrets? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter. Maggie turned on him, her voice sharp, shaking. You ever lost something you can't get back, Tom? You ever stand in front of a whole town and beg your own child to forgive you? No? Then maybe you should keep quiet. The barn went silent again. Evelyn stared at her mother, something shifting behind her eyes. For a moment, Maggie saw the little girl she used to hold, the one who believed in happy endings. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, voice quieter. Why now, Mom? Why bring Monarch here like this? Maggie's shoulders slumped, the fight draining away. Because this is all I have left. The ranch, Monarch, my pride. I thought maybe if I could save this, I could save something of us too. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn glanced at the horse, her features softening. Silver Monarch, sensing the change, reached his great head out to her. Evelyn hesitated, then let him nuzzle her hand. It was the first touch, the first peace in years. The crowd, sensing something sacred, began to drift out, murmuring. The auctioneer shrugged and snapped his clipboard shut. Auction's over, folks. Let's give these ladies their space. As the barn emptied, mother and daughter stood alone, with only Silver Monarch between them, breathing in the dust and memory. Neither knew what came next, but something had broken, and maybe, just maybe, something could start to heal. The Carter Ranch sign creaked in the wind as Maggie guided her old Chevy pickup through the gates, dust swirling up from the long gravel driveway. Beside her, Evelyn sat rigid, arms folded tight, gaze locked on the wide fields bathed in fading afternoon light. The ride home from the auction was thick with silence, a silence not of peace but of wounds left open, heavy as the coming dusk. Maggie risked a glance at her daughter, searching for some hint of softness. She remembered so many rides like this when Evelyn was young, singing along to country radio, laughing at nothing, the two of them free and wild on the open road. Now that ease was gone, replaced by the weight of everything unspoken. Silver Monarch followed in the trailer, occasionally kicking the side, reminding them of the storm they'd just weathered in town. Maggie's hands tightened on the wheel as she pulled up beside the old barn, its red paint chipped and faded, the hayloft windows yawning like tired eyes. She killed the engine, and for a moment neither woman moved. "I'll get Monarch," Maggie said, voice rough. Evelyn nodded, stepping out into the Texas evening, boots sinking into sun-baked dirt. The land stretched for miles, fields of pale grass dotted with wildflowers, the distant fence lines leaning as if tired from holding back the world. It was a view she'd known since childhood, a view that had once meant home. Maggie led Monarch from the trailer, his hooves ringing against the metal ramp. He tossed his head, restless, catching the unfamiliar tension in the air. Evelyn stood back, arms folded, watching. She remembered being a girl, standing in this very spot, dreaming of riding Monarch's grandsire along the creek at dawn. But so much had changed. They walked Monarch into the paddock in silence. The horse shook out his mane, snorted, and immediately rolled in the dust, as if claiming the earth as his own. For a moment, Evelyn let a half-smile flicker across her lips. Maggie saw it, hope sparking in her chest. As the evening deepened, Maggie moved quietly through the barn, tossing hay, checking the tack room, trying to anchor herself in routine. Each worn saddle, each faded photograph on the tack room wall, tugged at memories. Her late husband's broad grin, Evelyn's first ribbon, family dinners crowded around the kitchen table. All the good times felt like ghosts drifting through the rafters. Evelyn wandered the yard, trailing fingers across the peeling fence, breathing in the scent of horses and old hay. She paused at the porch steps, remembering how she'd once sat there with a scraped knee, waiting for her mother's gentle touch. Instead, she'd gotten advice about toughening up, lessons about grit and pride and survival. She'd never doubted her mother's strength, only wondered why it always seemed to matter more than tenderness. Inside, Maggie brewed coffee, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the chipped Carter Ranch mug. The house was clean but worn, patched together by years of hard work. The fridge buzzed, the kitchen clock ticked, and the silence pressed in. "Coffee's on," Maggie called, voice echoing through the house. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped inside. The living room was smaller than she remembered, filled with relics of a different life, trophies on the mantel, a faded quilt draped over the couch, her father's old guitar propped in the corner. She sat at the table waiting as Maggie poured 2 cups, set one before her, and took the seat across. Neither spoke. The air buzzed with awkwardness and old pain. Evelyn traced a crack in the tabletop, remembering arguments shouted across this very surface, slamming doors, the day she finally packed her bags and left without looking back. Maggie sipped her coffee, then finally broke the quiet. "Do you remember when your daddy built that fence out back? Took us all summer? I still find rusty nails in the grass every now and then." Evelyn looked up, surprised by the gentle tone. "I remember. He used to tell me stories while we worked, about wild Mustangs, outlaws, pioneers." Maggie managed a small smile. "He loved his stories. Always said if you want to keep a place alive, you got to fill it with good memories." Evelyn's voice softened. "Hard to make memories when you're always working. It felt like the ranch was the only thing that mattered." Maggie's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I wanted to give you something nobody could take away. Thought if I worked hard enough, you'd understand. Maybe forgive me." Evelyn stared out the window, watching Monarch graze in the twilight. The horse moved with such quiet power, so sure of his place. She wondered if she'd ever feel that at home again. As night settled in, the old house creaked and shifted, the land exhaling after another long day. Maggie climbed the stairs to her bedroom, pausing at the landing to watch Evelyn standing in the yard. For a moment, the years seemed to collapse. Mother and daughter, both stubborn, both haunted by love unspoken. Evelyn lingered on the porch, listening to the cicadas, feeling the ghosts of her childhood swirl around her. She closed her eyes, letting the memories come, her mother's laughter, her father's steady hand, her own voice ringing out over the fields. Not all of it was pain. Some of it, just maybe, could be reclaimed. In the paddock, Silver Monarch lifted his head, moonlight dancing on his coat. He seemed to watch the house, as if waiting for the family inside to find their way again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new wounds, maybe a chance to heal. For tonight, the Carter Ranch slept beneath the endless prairie sky, caught between past and future, sorrow and hope. And somewhere in the silence, a single note of forgiveness began to echo, faint but real, across the fields. The first pale rays of dawn crept through the blinds as Evelyn opened her eyes, unsure for a moment where she was. The familiar smell of old wood, coffee, and horses drifted through the window. For a heartbeat, she felt 16 again. Then the ache of everything that had been said and left unsaid the day before settled over her. She sat up, blinking away sleep, and glanced at her phone. No urgent messages. She could leave today, slip out before breakfast, and disappear again. But something stubborn, maybe pride or just a trace of hope, made her pause. Downstairs, Maggie was already bustling in the kitchen, frying bacon in her cast-iron skillet, humming an old Patsy Cline tune under her breath. The sound was rough around the edges, but it filled the small house with a comfort that surprised Evelyn. She hovered in the doorway, unsure if she was intruding, but Maggie just gave her a quick nod and said, "Plates are in the cabinet. Help yourself, Evie." Evie. The nickname tugged at something inside Evelyn, a memory of her mother calling out across the fields, laughter in her voice. She poured herself coffee, hesitated, then took a seat at the table. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a companionable quiet, the kind that settles in when two people want to talk but don't know how to begin. After breakfast, Maggie pulled on her boots and gestured to the paddock. "Want to walk with me? Monarch could use a little company." Evelyn almost refused, instinctively retreating behind old walls. But then she nodded. "Sure, why not?" Outside, the morning was fresh, the air tinged with dew and the sharp scent of alfalfa. Silver Monarch grazed near the fence, his dark coat glistening in the light. He lifted his head as the two women approached, ears swiveling, eyes bright with curiosity. Evelyn hesitated, keeping her distance, but Monarch stepped toward her with a gentleness that startled her. He lowered his great head, nuzzling her hand, his breath warm and steady. Maggie watched, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He remembers you, you know. Horses never forget kindness." Evelyn stroked Monarch's muzzle, feeling tension ease from her shoulders. "He was just a colt the last time I saw him up close." Maggie nodded. "He was wild then. You were the only one who could get him to eat from your palm." For a moment, they stood in easy silence, the only sounds the quiet snuffling of Monarch and the distant hum of the ranch waking up. Evelyn glanced over, catching her mother's gaze. "Why'd you really bring him to auction?" Evelyn asked quietly. Maggie looked down at the dirt, her boots scuffing small circles. "I thought it was the only way to save the ranch. Thought if I could get enough for him, maybe pay off some of the debts, maybe buy us a little more time. I didn't want to lose everything your father built." Evelyn's voice was softer now. "And if you'd lost him?" Maggie blinked hard, her voice nearly a whisper. "Then I'd have lost the last piece of this family I had left. Evelyn's anger faded, replaced by something heavier, grief for all the years they'd wasted. She realized how hard it must have been for her mother, carrying the ranch, the memory of her husband, and the weight of their broken relationship alone. The ranch, Silver Monarch, even the hard choices, none of it had ever been about pride. It had been about survival. They finished their chores together, moving in a rhythm that felt almost natural, falling back into patterns learned long ago. They mended a broken fence, laughing when the stubborn old nails refused to cooperate, then brushed out Monarch's tangled mane. With each small task, the walls between them lowered, brick by invisible brick. Later that afternoon, the two women sat on the porch, sharing iced tea and stories. Maggie told tales of the ranch's glory days, when buyers would come from as far as Oklahoma just to see the Carter horses, when the barn would echo with music and laughter during the county fair. Evelyn listened, drawn in despite herself, picturing her mother as a younger woman, fierce, determined, beloved by the land and everyone on it. Evelyn hesitated, then finally spoke. "I always felt like I was competing with the ranch, like it was your real child, and I was just here." Maggie set her glass down, her eyes troubled. "I'm sorry, Evie. I never meant for you to feel that way. I wanted to give you something that would last. I didn't know how to balance it all, didn't know how to be both a rancher and a mother." Evelyn looked at her hands, searching for the right words. "I guess I never really tried to understand either. I just wanted you to see me." Maggie reached out hesitantly and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I see you now." Before Evelyn could reply, Silver Monarch came trotting up to the fence, nickering softly. Evelyn stood, walked over, and this time when the horse nuzzled her, she threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his warm coat. Monarch stood perfectly still, breathing in slow and deep, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Maggie watched, wiping away tears she didn't bother to hide. In that instant, she saw hope for her family's future, something strong enough to withstand even the fiercest storms. As evening fell, the two women sat side by side, watching the sky turn gold and pink above the fields. There was still so much to say, so much to heal, but for the first time in years, they weren't alone with their pain. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer ruled the present. In the paddock, Silver Monarch galloped along the fence, wild and free, a living symbol of second chances. And in the quiet that followed, Maggie and Evelyn shared the smallest of smiles, a fragile truce forged from the ashes of old regret and the glimmer of new beginnings. Word spreads fast in small towns, and Dry Creek was no exception. By the next morning, everyone who hadn't witnessed the Carter family showdown at the auction heard about it over coffee at the diner, in whispered phone calls, or in the line at the feed store. "Did you see how Evelyn came back and read her mom the riot act?" some said, shaking their heads with a gossipy thrill. Others, more sympathetic, murmured, "It's about time those two talked things out. Maybe something good'll come of it." But not everyone wanted to see the Carter women mend their fences. Some neighbors, long jealous of the ranch's former glory or still smarting from old business rivalries, saw opportunity in the Carter family's pain. Jealousy, after all, is a quiet thing until it gets teeth. At first, Maggie tried to ignore the stares and whispers, pouring herself into work on the ranch. She and Evelyn shared awkward, sometimes silent mornings, fixing water lines or hauling feed, both women circling around each other with a new, tentative respect. In those moments, they almost found a rhythm. but it was fragile. One stray word, one old wound, and everything threatened to snap. One afternoon, as a thunderhead gathered in the distance, Evelyn returned from town with a sack of groceries. She found Maggie leaning against the porch railing, scanning a letter with pursed lips. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, setting the bags down. Maggie folded the letter sharply. "Bank. They're reviewing the loan again. Says the board heard rumors about instability on the ranch." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "People have nothing better to do, I guess." Maggie sighed, her voice weary. "Folks remember us winning blue ribbons. They remember your daddy buying up land when times were good. Now they see vultures circling." As if on cue, a pickup truck slowed at the end of the drive, 2 men in the cab. They looked too long, then drove off, tires spitting gravel. Evelyn scowled. "Let 'em look. They'll see we're not beaten yet." But that night, trouble crept in like a snake in tall grass. Around midnight, Evelyn heard a strange clanging from the direction of the paddock. She slipped on her boots and hurried outside, flashlight in hand. The moon was half hidden by clouds, but she could just make out 2 shadowy figures crouched by the fence. "Hey!" Evelyn yelled, her voice slicing through the night. The figures bolted, one tripping and cursing as they fled toward the woods behind the barn. She chased for a few yards, but they were younger, quicker, and vanished into the dark. Evelyn returned to the paddock, heart pounding. The lock on Silver Monarch's gate hung twisted and half-broken, fresh scratch marks glinting in her beam. She ran her hands along the fence. 2 boards were loosened, as if someone had tried to pry them off. Inside, Monarch paced nervously, snorting and pawing the ground. Maggie appeared moments later, shotgun cradled in her arms, face pale but furious. "What happened?" "Somebody tried to break into Monarch's paddock," Evelyn said, breathless. "I scared 'em off, but they nearly got the gate open." Maggie's face tightened. "Damned fools! They could have spooked him bad. He could have run for miles." Together, they checked the rest of the property, making sure no other gates or doors had been tampered with. The wind picked up, rattling the barn roof and sending shivers down their spines. When they finally returned to the porch, the tension between them had changed. Less about old family wounds, more about a common threat. Inside, Maggie paced the kitchen. "This is my fault. If I hadn't brought Monarch to auction, stirred everybody up." Evelyn shook her head, jaw set. "No, Mom, this isn't your fault. People make choices. We can't control what they do, only how we respond." Maggie watched her daughter, pride mingling with worry. "You were always braver than me, Evie, even as a kid. Never backed down from a fight." Evelyn offered a tired smile. Learned from the best. The next day, news of the sabotage spread. Some folks were outraged, others suspiciously quiet. Old friends came by to offer help. Tom Ortega showed up with a length of new chain and a box of locks. "Saw what happened?" he said quietly. "Let me know if you need a night watch. A lot of us still remember what your family's done for this town." But there were also sharp glances from certain neighbors at the feed store, sidelong looks and whispered jokes. One woman, never a friend to the Carters, said loud enough for Evelyn to hear, "Funny, the trouble always finds that family, doesn't it?" Evelyn kept her cool, but inside, anger burned. She called the sheriff, filed a report, and made sure everyone knew the Carter Ranch wasn't afraid to fight back. That evening, as a storm rumbled closer, Maggie and Evelyn reinforced Monarch's paddock together. They strung up new wire, tightened every post, checked locks twice. Monarch watched them, calm now, occasionally butting his head against Evelyn's arm for attention. Working side by side in the half-light, something shifted between mother and daughter, a wordless understanding. No matter what the town thought, or who tried to tear them down, they were in this together now. For the first time in years, Maggie allowed herself to hope. Lightning forked on the horizon, and Evelyn glanced at her mom. "You think the storm will be bad?" Maggie nodded, voice steady. "Texas storms are always bad, but we'll weather it. We always have." Together, they stood at the fence as thunder rolled, their faces set, not in fear, but in fierce determination. In the shadows behind them, Silver Monarch stood tall and unbroken, a living symbol of their shared resolve. And though the night ahead would be rough, for the first time in a long time, neither Carter woman felt alone in the fight. The first distant boom of thunder shook the window panes just after dusk. Maggie, never one to fuss over a little weather, looked up from the kitchen sink as the lights flickered. The Carter Ranch had seen plenty of storms over the years, but tonight's clouds were angry, swollen, black, rolling low across the prairie like a herd of wild mustangs set loose on the wind. Evelyn stood on the porch, scanning the horizon. Heat lightning flashed far off, illuminating the fields and barn in stuttering, ghostly white. She could smell the rain coming, thick and electric, laced with the scent of mesquite and dust. A nervous tension buzzed in her chest, the kind that always came before trouble. Maggie joined her, squinting into the gloom. "That storm's moving fast." Evelyn nodded, feeling an old, familiar urgency. "If the creek jumps its banks, the lower pastures'll flood. The north fence is already weak." For a moment, mother and daughter exchanged a look. No blame, no argument, just two Carter women reading the sky and knowing what needed doing. They sprang into action, grabbing flashlights, ponchos, and the heavy boots that lived by the back door. As they hustled to the barn, the wind whipped their hair and rattled the tin roof. The horses were already uneasy, whinnying and stamping, picking up on the storm's approach. Silver Monarch was the calmest of the lot, his head held high, but even he moved with restless energy, flaring his nostrils at each crack of thunder. "We've got to get everyone to higher ground," Maggie said, yanking on a halter. "We'll use the back paddock. It's the driest spot left." Evelyn nodded, already moving to open the gates. Sheets of rain began to fall, at first soft and warm, then hammering down with sudden violence. Lightning struck somewhere beyond the fields, close enough to make the earth tremble. The next hour blurred into chaos. Maggie led the smaller horses, shouting directions over the roar of rain and wind. Evelyn fought with a stubborn gelding who refused to leave his stall, finally coaxing him out with the promise of oats. In the flash of the storm, they moved like shadows, battered by wind, soaked to the bone, driven only by muscle memory and raw grit. Silver Monarch was last. The big stallion balked at the barn door, spooked by a violent crack of thunder. Evelyn pressed a calming hand to his neck, whispering steady nonsense, her own childhood secret for quieting a frightened animal. "It's just noise, Monarch. Just a little thunder. You're safe, big guy." He let her slip the lead rope over his head, but as she tugged him toward the paddock, a bolt of lightning struck a nearby tree with a deafening crack. The world went white, then black, and Monarch reared, ripping the rope from Evelyn's grasp. "Monarch, no!" she yelled, voice ragged with panic. The stallion bolted through the half-open gate, hooves thundering into the darkness. Maggie, running back from the far paddock, skidded to a halt. heart in her throat. Evelyn. What happened? He's loose. He's headed for the road. Evelyn's voice cracked, fear slicing through her like ice. Without hesitation, she took off after Monarch, legs pumping, lungs burning. The rain was blinding now, stinging her face, turning the yard into a river of mud. She chased Monarch past the fence line, through a stand of old pecan trees, calling his name over and over. She could just make out his silhouette, massive, wild, racing toward the creek. "Don't do this, Monarch. Please, stop," Evelyn gasped, slipping, nearly falling. In the distance, headlights appeared, Tom Ortega's truck braving the storm. He saw the chase and threw his high beams across the field, illuminating Monarch as the stallion hesitated at the water's edge. Evelyn seized her chance. She sprinted forward, sliding in the muck, and threw herself in front of the big horse, arms spread wide. "Monarch, easy boy, come on," she panted, barely able to catch her breath. "Don't run. We need you. I need you." Monarch danced sideways, snorting, eyes wild with fear and confusion. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought he'd trample her, or worse, bolt into the surging creek. But she held her ground, meeting his eyes, pouring every ounce of courage she had into her trembling voice. "Remember me, Monarch? I used to feed you apples by the barn. You know me? It's okay." Slowly, impossibly, Monarch quieted. He took a shaky step toward her, then another. Evelyn reached out, her hands shaking, and slipped the lead rope back over his head. Tom's truck idled nearby, headlights casting long shadows as the rain began to ease. Maggie caught up, out of breath, her face streaked with mud and tears. She flung her arms around Evelyn and Monarch both, the three of them clinging together as the adrenaline drained away. "You saved him," Maggie whispered, voice breaking. "You saved us both." The storm moved off, thunder fading into the distance. The ranch was battered but intact. Fences down, branches strewn everywhere. But the horses were safe. Together, Maggie and Evelyn walked Monarch back to the barn, Tom driving slowly behind to light their way. By the time they reached the porch, the first stars were peeking through the clouds. Exhausted, soaked, but alive, the Carters looked at each other and finally laughed, a shaky, wild laugh that came from relief and something like joy. In that laughter, beneath the bruised Texas sky, a new bond took root, one born not just of blood, but of the hard-won trust that only comes from fighting through a storm, side by side. And inside the barn, Silver Monarch stood tall and proud, a survivor, like the family who loved him. The Texas night hung heavy after the storm. The world outside washed clean, but inside the Carter ranch, everything was raw and exposed. The power flickered back on just after midnight. Maggie and Evelyn dragged themselves inside, peeling off sodden clothes, leaving muddy boots by the back door. Exhaustion pressed on them, but neither could sleep. Too much adrenaline, too many unspoken words still echoing from the chaos of the night. Maggie brewed 2 mugs of instant cocoa, the only sweet comfort she had left in the cupboard. She slid one across the table to Evelyn, who wrapped chilled fingers around it, grateful for the warmth. For a long time, the only sound was the rain tapping softly on the kitchen windows and the slow, even breathing of 2 women trying to find their footing in a world that had shifted under their boots. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "You always did know how to find the good cocoa when things went to hell." Maggie managed a tired smile. "It's an old trick. Storms come and go, but a little sugar helps the ground settle. I learned that the hard way." They both sipped, shoulders sagging, letting the warmth sink into their bones. The farmhouse felt both safe and exposed, its walls holding the memories of every fight, every reconciliation, every dream and disappointment the Carters had ever weathered. Evelyn set her mug down. I keep thinking about last night. If I hadn't caught Monarch, if Tom hadn't shown up. Maggie reached across the table, her hand covering her daughter's. But you did. You ran after him, Evie. I don't know if I would have been that brave. Evelyn looked down, voice rough. I was terrified, Mom. I haven't felt that kind of fear in years, but it wasn't just for Monarch. I was afraid of losing everything again, losing you. The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. I'm the one who made you feel alone. I see that now. When your daddy died, it felt like I had to keep the ranch together at all costs. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I made this place strong enough, I could keep us safe. But I wasn't strong. I was scared. And I pushed you away. Evelyn squeezed her mother's hand. I thought you didn't want me here. I thought the ranch was more important. So I left and I made myself a stranger. But when I saw you at that auction, I realized I still wanted to come home even if I didn't know how. Maggie wiped at her eyes. You did come home. You came back when it mattered. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Lightning flashed again, far away, but the storm was moving on. Evelyn took a deep breath, the words coming easier now. It wasn't just you, Mom. I was stubborn. I didn't want to see how hard you were struggling. Maybe I could have helped more, or at least not judged so quick. Maggie shook her head, lips trembling. You were a kid. You needed a mother, not a foreman. I forgot that, Evie, and I'm sorry. For every missed birthday, for every time I made you feel less than those horses. I'm sorry. A hush fell, deeper than before. Evelyn felt years of resentment start to loosen. Her anger and disappointment softening into something more complicated. It hurts, Mom. It really does. But I think I'm ready to let some of it go. I don't want to keep carrying it. Tears fell freely now from both women. Maggie stood, shaky but determined, and pulled Evelyn into a tight embrace. I love you, Evie. I always have, even when I didn't know how to show it. I love you too, Mom, Evelyn whispered, the words feeling strange but right. They stood like that for a while, two survivors clinging together in the wreckage of old hurts. When they finally parted, the kitchen felt different, lighter, as if some invisible burden had finally been set down. Outside, the first hints of dawn colored the sky pale blue. Maggie poured fresh coffee, and they moved to the back porch, watching as the world came alive again. Birds chattered in the wet trees, and the smell of wet earth and new grass drifted on the breeze. Silver Monarch stood at the far end of the paddock, head held high, surveying his kingdom as if he'd been born for just this moment. Evelyn smiled, wiping her cheeks. He's a fighter, just like us. Maggie nodded. Maybe that's why he survived. Why we all did. You only get so many second chances in this life, Evie. I don't want to waste ours. They talked then, really talked, for the first time in years. Evelyn shared stories of her life away from the ranch, jobs lost and found, friends made, the emptiness she felt every time she thought about home. Maggie opened up about her grief after losing her husband, the pressure of keeping the ranch afloat, the loneliness that no amount of work or pride could ever quite fill. Some memories were painful to speak aloud, but with each confession, the distance between them shrank. Forgiveness didn't come all at once, but it started to bloom, tentative, but real. They laughed about old barn dances and wept over lost dreams. The sun climbed higher, and still they talked, the walls between them breaking down with every word, every tear. As morning broke fully, Silver Monarch ambled over to the fence, watching them with intelligent, gentle eyes. Evelyn walked over, and the stallion leaned his great head against her shoulder, as if to say, "You're home now." Maggie joined them, her hand resting on Monarch's neck, and together, the three stood quietly, facing the new day. The past would always be part of them, but for the first time, it no longer held them captive. In the light of the dawn, hope bloomed again on the prairie, fragile but fierce, carried forward by the women who refused to let their story end in heartbreak. When the sun broke free over the horizon, the Carter Ranch looked different. The fields glistened, washed clean by the storm. Dew sparkled on the grass. The scent of earth and wildflowers drifted on the early breeze, mixing with the crisp tang of hay. It was a morning that felt like a beginning, as if the storm had swept away not just broken branches and old leaves, but a decade of pain and regret. Maggie awoke before her alarm, surprised to feel a lightness in her chest that had been missing for years. She stretched, her joints aching, but her spirit refreshed. She found Evelyn already dressed and sipping coffee on the porch, the mug cradled between her palms, gaze lost in the waking landscape. Maggie poured herself a cup and joined her daughter. The silence between them was different now, gentle, almost companionable. They didn't need words to fill the space. They watched Silver Monarch and the other horses grazing, moving slowly through the mist like something out of a dream. "You sleep at all?" Maggie asked, breaking the quiet. Evelyn smiled, tired but genuine. "Not much, but I feel different, better." Maggie nodded, watching the stallion nudge at the fence, looking for attention. "Me too." A pickup rumbled down the lane. Tom Ortega again, but this time he brought donuts and a grin. "You two looked like you could use a little sugar," he joked, handing over the box. "Heard you made it through the storm with all your horses and your hides intact." "We had some help," Maggie said, giving Evelyn a knowing look. Tom tipped his hat. "Word is spreading. Folks are talking. And for once, it ain't just gossip. You've got people rooting for you. Maggie." That sparked something in Evelyn. She glanced at her mother. "I've been thinking, Mom, about the ranch. What if we changed things up a bit? Opened it up to more people, maybe offered riding lessons. Let local kids come out and meet the horses." Maggie looked surprised, almost cautious. "You mean let outsiders in?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes bright. "Yeah, I mean, look at Monarch. He draws a crowd wherever he goes. He could be the centerpiece of something bigger, a place where people can come, learn, heal. Not just us, but the whole community." Maggie considered, biting her lip. For so long, her instinct had been to protect what little remained of the Carter legacy, to close herself off. But now, looking at Evelyn, at Monarch, at the promise of a new day, something shifted. "I don't hate the idea," she said softly. "Maybe it's time we share what we have left." They started small. That afternoon, they hung a sign at the end of the driveway. "Carter Ranch, riding lessons and animal therapy. All ages welcome." Tom helped spread the word, posting a photo of Silver Monarch on the town Facebook page. Within hours, Maggie's phone was buzzing with messages. Families wanting to visit, parents asking about lessons, even the local elementary school inquiring about field trips. Maggie felt nervous as the first cars rolled up, engines rumbling across the gravel. She straightened her shirt, dusted off her boots, and tried to remember how to smile for strangers. Evelyn handled introductions, her warmth contagious, while Maggie showed the kids how to approach the horses, calm, gentle, never sudden. The children's laughter rang across the fields, filling the old ranch with new life. Silver Monarch became an instant favorite, nuzzling little hands, posing for photos, even allowing a brave few to sit on his broad back. One boy, quiet and withdrawn, stood apart until Monarch ambled over, dropping his great head into the child's arms. The boy's face lit up, and Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. She realized how much she had missed this, sharing the magic of horses with others, seeing them work their quiet miracles. As the week went on, more families came. A mother brought her daughter, who used a wheelchair, and watched as Monarch stood perfectly still while the girl stroked his mane. A group of teenagers, rowdy at first, grew hushed around the gentle stallion, asking questions about his lineage and learning to brush his coat. Maggie watched Evelyn teaching, patient and steady, and felt a pride that went deeper than any blue ribbon. The community responded in ways Maggie never expected. Old rivals stopped by with congratulations and offers to help. A neighbor donated fence posts. The town's retired veterinarian volunteered to check up on the herd every month. Some of the people who'd once whispered about Carter Ranch's troubles now became allies, eager to see the place thrive. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of pink and gold, Maggie and Evelyn stood at the paddock fence, watching the horses and children mingle. "You know, I never imagined this," Maggie said quietly. "All those years I thought the only way to keep the ranch alive was to shut everyone out. I was wrong." Evelyn smiled. "Sometimes it takes a storm to show us what really matters." They stood together, sharing the moment, while Silver Monarch grazed at their feet. The ranch that had once echoed with loneliness and regret now rang with hope and laughter. Maggie squeezed her daughter's hand. "You brought this back to life, Evie. I couldn't have done it without you." Evelyn shook her head. "We did it together, Mom. All of us, including Monarch." The sky darkened, stars pricking through the dusk. Inside the barn, the horses settled in for the night. Outside, the Carter women lingered, warmed by a fire pit, the voices of their new friends fading gently into the night. The future was uncertain, but for the first time Maggie welcomed it, with her daughter, her community, and the mighty stallion who had become a living symbol of second chances. The Carter Ranch had found its heart again, stronger and more open than ever before. Word of the new Carter Ranch spread far beyond Dry Creek. Photos of Silver Monarch with grinning kids began popping up online. Letters arrived from families grateful for a taste of country life and the healing power of horses. Sometimes, Maggie would catch herself smiling for no reason as she mucked out stalls or walked the fields at dawn. It had been so long since she felt this alive, since the work felt like a gift, not a burden. But healing, she realized, wasn't just about filling the barn with laughter. It was about facing the hard truths that had haunted her and Evelyn for years, about making sense of the wreckage and finding purpose in its lessons. The ranch's new life had given Maggie space to think, to really see the path she'd walked, and where it had brought her. One quiet afternoon, as the last children left for the day, and Monarch grazed peacefully beneath the old oak, Maggie called Evelyn to the porch. The sky was wide and blue, the air humming with cicadas. They sat side by side, watching the golden light spill across the fields. The silence between them warm and easy. Maggie cleared her throat. You ever wonder why it took so long for us to get here, Evie? Evelyn smiled, a bit sadly. All the time. I think about everything we lost, all the years we wasted. But I also think maybe we needed to lose everything before we could find what mattered. Maggie nodded, her eyes misty. I've been thinking about that too. For so long, I thought if I just worked harder, if I pushed through every setback, I could fix everything. But I was just hiding from grief, from guilt, even from you. Evelyn looked at her mother, seeing not just the tough rancher but the woman beneath, scared, flawed, trying her best. I spent a lot of years being angry, Mom. It was easier than admitting I missed you, or that I still needed you. I guess I was hiding too. Maggie reached for her daughter's hand, the touch gentle but sure. We're both stubborn. I see that now. But stubbornness won't heal a heart. It just keeps you alone. They watched Monarch as he wandered near, his powerful frame softened by the afternoon light. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the far side of the yard, a reminder of the change that had swept through their lives. You know, Maggie said quietly, I used to think the ranch was my legacy. All those trophies, those bloodlines, proof I mattered. But it turns out, none of that means a thing if you can't face your own mistakes. Evelyn squeezed her hand. You did, though. You owned up to everything, even when it hurt. That takes courage, Mom. Maggie shook her head, smiling softly. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, asking you to forgive me and meaning it. But that's the lesson, isn't it? Real strength isn't about holding on to pride or winning every fight. It's about knowing when you've been wrong, asking for a second chance, and doing the work to earn it. A gentle wind stirred the trees, scattering cottonwood seeds like tiny wishes across the lawn. I used to believe that the past was something you could outrun if you just worked hard enough, Maggie continued. But you can't. It follows you. The only way forward is to turn and face it, to admit where you went wrong and to try, really try, to make it right. Evelyn rested her head on Maggie's shoulder. I think that's true for me too. I wasted so much time thinking I had to do everything alone, that needing people made me weak. But it's the opposite. Letting someone in, letting them help you, that's the bravest thing of all. A comfortable silence settled, filled with the soft sounds of ranch life, the clatter of hooves, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the steady hum of summer insects. After a while, Maggie stood, stretching stiff joints, and walked to the fence where Monarch stood waiting. She stroked his neck, remembering all the years she poured her hopes and fears into the horses. Now, she realized, they had given her something in return, a bridge to her daughter, a reason to keep going. Evelyn joined her, leaning on the top rail. What do you want the Carter Ranch to be now, Mom? What's the real legacy? Maggie looked out over the fields, her voice strong. Not just a place for horses or ribbons. I want it to be somewhere people come for second chances. A place where nobody's past can stop them from finding hope. That's what matters now. Evelyn smiled, a sense of peace blooming in her chest. I like that. Together, they walked the fence line, checking for damage from the storm, laughing when they found a turtle sunbathing on a fallen log. For the first time in years, Maggie felt the heavy ache of regret begin to lift, replaced by something lighter. Gratitude for the lessons learned, pride in the work it took to heal. Later that evening, as the stars blinked awake over the prairie, Maggie wrote in her journal, a habit she'd neglected for years. Her words flowed, honest and unguarded. Redemption isn't a gift you wait for. It's the work you do every day, apologizing, forgiving, trying again. My legacy isn't horses or trophies. It's Evelyn. It's every person who walks through this gate and finds a reason to hope. Inside the house, Evelyn put on a pot of tea and looked through old family photos, finally able to smile at the memories. She understood now that healing was a journey, not a destination. That forgiveness didn't erase the past, but made a future possible. As the Carter Ranch settled for the night, mother and daughter knew they'd never be perfect, never erase all the pain. But they had earned their second chance, not by forgetting what was lost, but by building something better, together. And Silver Monarch, the last of his legendary line, watched over them, a living symbol of endurance, grace, and the power of beginning again. The sky blushed pink and gold as the first rays of dawn crept across the Carter Ranch. A thin mist curled over the fields, catching the sunlight and turning every blade of grass into something magical. The prairie seemed endless and new, as if the world itself were offering the Carters a clean slate. Maggie stood at the edge of the porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, eyes sweeping the land she had fought so long to keep. For years, she'd woken to mornings like this and felt only the weight of responsibility, debts, worries, the gnawing ache of a fractured family. Today, she breathed in hope. Her heart felt lighter, not because the work was done, but because it was finally shared. She could hear Evelyn moving about in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the melody of a familiar country tune drifting through the open window. There was laughter, too, easy and unforced, coming from the bunkhouse, where local kids who'd stayed the night were getting ready for their first sunrise ride. Evelyn joined her on the porch, cheeks flushed from the kitchen's warmth. She handed her mother a second cup, nudging Maggie's shoulder. "We've got a crowd this morning. Might need to put Monarch on double duty." Maggie grinned. "He won't mind. He's always liked a little attention." She looked over to where Silver Monarch grazed in the nearest paddock, head high and coat shining. The stallion had become the pride of the community, not for his pedigree, but for the stories, hope, and healing he'd brought with him. As the children filed out, their chatter bubbling with excitement, Evelyn gathered everyone by the barn. Maggie watched her daughter, struck again by how much she'd grown. The girl who once ran from pain had become a woman who could guide others through it. Evelyn gave instructions, matching each child with a gentle horse, reminding them to be calm, to trust the animal beneath them, to breathe in the prairie air and listen for the heartbeat of the land. "Ready for the main event?" Evelyn called out, waving to Maggie. Maggie nodded, opening Monarch's gate. The stallion trotted forward, regal but gentle, as if he sensed the significance of the moment. One by one, children swung up into the saddle, their eyes wide with wonder. A few of the braver kids rode double, clutching each other, shrieking with delight when Monarch snorted and tossed his mane. Parents watched from the fence line, phones out, faces shining with pride. Some had tears in their eyes. Even a few of the old-timers, ranchers who once sneered at the Carter family's troubles, stood quietly in the background, tipping their hats and muttering to each other about how things used to be. Maggie and Evelyn mounted up, joining the group on horseback. The long line of riders wound through the pasture, Monarch leading the way. Sunlight danced off the tall grass, painting everything gold. laughter and shouts carried on the wind. It was a moment out of time, a celebration, a new beginning, a testament to the power of endurance and forgiveness. As they rode, Maggie's mind drifted. She remembered the first time she ever rode out at dawn with her own father, how he'd told her, "You take care of the land, and the land will take care of you." She thought of all the mistakes, all the nights she lay awake wishing she could start over. She understood now that she had, a dozen times or more. Each day, each apology, each act of love was its own new beginning. They stopped at the crest of a hill, the whole prairie stretching before them. Monarch pawed the ground, nostrils flaring as he surveyed his kingdom. Evelyn swung down, helping a nervous child dismount, murmuring words of encouragement. Maggie closed her eyes, letting the sunlight warm her face. She felt Evelyn's hand on her arm. "Look what we built, Mom." Maggie opened her eyes. She saw more than fields and fences. She saw possibility. She saw a future that belonged to more than just herself or Evelyn. The ranch was alive with hope, laughter, and the promise of second chances. "Yeah," she whispered. "Look what we built." The group headed back as the sun rose higher, the ranch coming fully awake. Breakfast waited in the kitchen. Pancakes and scrambled eggs, orange juice and strong coffee. The barn echoed with stories and laughter, the smell of horses, leather, and maple syrup mingling in the air. Maggie walked among the families, trading jokes with the kids, answering questions about Monarch's favorite treats and the best way to braid a mane. She felt a connection to every soul on the ranch, not just as the owner, but as a part of their lives. Later that morning, after the crowd had thinned, Maggie and Evelyn sat together beneath the old oak. Monarch grazed nearby, dozing in the shade. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the land seemed to hum with quiet joy. "I used to think the end of something was always a failure," Maggie said, her voice thoughtful. "But sometimes the end is just the beginning. If you're brave enough to forgive, to try again." Evelyn smiled, leaning into her mother. "We can't change what's behind us, but we can choose what comes next." Maggie nodded. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about what you do after, the love you offer, the lessons you pass on. A hush fell as they watched the sunlight dance across the fields. Monarch raised his head, mane lifting in the breeze, a symbol of grace, survival, and the kind of hope that never quits. "No matter how lost we get," Maggie murmured, "it's never too late to come home and begin again." As the day wore on, the ranch bustled with energy and life, a place reborn. Children's laughter rang through the fields. Families stayed late, reluctant to leave, drawn to the warmth and welcome that Maggie and Evelyn had worked so hard to build. The Carter Ranch, once a place of loneliness and regret, now shone with the simple magic of belonging. When the last truck rolled away and the sun dipped toward the horizon, Maggie stood at the gate, her heart full. She watched Evelyn walk among the horses, Monarch always close by, and knew they had truly come home. Silver Monarch, a living legend, galloped once more across the open prairie, carrying with him not just the weight of a bloodline, but the hope of a family and a community healed at last. And beneath the endless Texas sky, the Carters learned what it meant to begin again, together.